In our next topic, we're talking about ways of reducing the amount of municipal solid waste. And so much of the material that actually ends up in landfills can be diverted and can be recycled or reused or disposed of in alternate ways. And so one way of doing that is through recycling. And the term recycling means to take what would have been a waste product and to process it so that it can be converted into a new product. And ideally, you can have a repetitive life cycle of some of these products. For example, glass. Glass is quite recyclable. And when you recycle a glass container, it basically gets broken, melted down, and poured into a brand new glass container. So you have sort of a closed loop when you're recycling glass. And you don't need to actually manufacture new glass to produce those products. Paper products can be recycled quite easily. Now there is some degradation in the quality. Recycled paper is different in quality from fresh paper, but it can be recycled pretty efficiently. Metals are extremely efficient at recycling. Basically, aluminum cans can be shredded up, melted down, purified, and poured into new aluminum cans. Same thing with steel and other metals as well. These are very recyclable, and recycling aluminum and using it as the source for more aluminum products saves about 96% of the fossil fuel use that producing new aluminum is. And many of these products are reused in significant ways. The vast majority, for example, of copper that's been mined is still in use today. Now, as we get into other substances, for example, plastics, things become more complicated. Plastics, which are a man-made petroleum-based polymer, they are more difficult to recycle. They are degrade. The quality of the material is degraded when it is recycled and formed into new products. Also, because of the abundance of fossil fuels and the packaging quality of plastics, it's often just cheaper for companies to use new plastics versus using recycled plastic material. And so that is a problem that arises from plastic recycling. And we're going to spend some time in class thinking about, recycling and what that means and how petroleum fossil fuel companies have maybe provided a false hope of how recyclable plastics are. But if you think about the waste materials, many of them, if you're including plastics, a large proportion can be recycled. Okay? And then there's also the diversion of organic waste to compost. So things like food waste, green waste, like yard trimmings and wood, these are materials that can be composted. Composting basically allows for the breakdown of these materials, and then the composted organic material can be used as fertilizer, as mulch, and things like that, diverting it from the landfill. It also means that there's going to be less risk of methane release leading to climate change, because when that organic matter ends up in landfills that are not collecting the methane, it just ends up in the atmosphere. And so we can look at sort of waste that's generated and how much of it's actually recovered. And so we can see that paper is one of the highest in terms of 70% or so of the paper waste is actually recovered through paper recycling. Yard waste, which is typically picked up by municipalities like the city or the town or the village of New Hartford, collects green waste from the curbside, and that typically is composted or mulched or things like that. And then we can see steel, glass, aluminum, and we see plastics are the lowest, right? And that makes sense with what we know about plastic recycling. If we think about what happens locally to our waste, how can we reduce our generation of solid waste. We already talked about what happens in the previous topic to the waste that we put out at the curbside and the garbage. Well, how do we reduce that? And in Oneida County, the Oneida Herkimer Solid Waste Authority is the organization responsible for disposal and recycling as well. And they have a lot of systems in place to try to minimize our landfilled waste and maximize our recycling and diversion of those materials. And so we'll talk about some of them. This is an overhead view. This is what it looks like. This is the area I mentioned in the previous topic. It's on Wirtz Ave in North Utica. Like I said, near Babe's, Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks, Tavalo, those places. And when you go back there, you could go back there as a consumer. I've been there many times. And when you pull in, so if you look at this, to the right of this is actually the wastewater treatment plant, which we'll talk about in a future topic. Next door is this facility. And you come in down Wirtz Ave here, and there's several things here that you can utilize as a consumer. And also commercially, all of our garbage and recycling is brought to this facility. So you loop in around, you can go in and you could bring a truckload of garbage here. You go through, you get weighed in this area on scales that your car is on. They check you in. You then pull around into this big sort of warehouse-like facility. This is what it looks like inside. It's called the transfer station. And basically, if you're bringing your own garbage there, you throw it onto the ground. You unload your truck. If you have construction waste, you can, dump it there. At the same time, there are garbage trucks doing the same thing. As a garbage truck makes its rounds, picks up garbage, compacts it, eventually we'll bring it here to the transfer station and unload it, drops onto the floor, and then this material is packed up and destined for a landfill. So this is not a landfill here in Utica, but this is the transfer station where that garbage is transported from this facility to the landfill. There's also here the recycling portion of the facility. And so when the trucks come around to collect garbage in the morning, they typically, there's two trucks, or sometimes it's one truck where the garbage goes in one section of the truck, and then the recyclable materials go in another truck. And the way we recycle in our area is through what's called single stream recycling. And this hasn't always been the case. I think this happened in the early 2000s. We went in our area from dual stream to single stream. Previously to that, you would have two bins at your home, and you would put containers like metal or glass containers, maybe plastic containers, in one bin, and you would put any paper products in a separate bin, and then you would have to put them out at the curb in separate bins. They'd have to be collected separately. We shifted in Oneida County to what we call single stream recycling, where basically any recycled material is put in a single container, and it gets separated. It all needs to be separated somewhere. It gets separated at the recycling facility. In our area that's managed by OHSWA, we recycle about 52%. And so that's a very high percentage of waste recycled compared to many other areas, which are typically like in the 20s. And so we have a system that's beneficial at maximizing recycling. And single stream recycling makes it very easy on the consumer, right? You just have to have an idea about what is recyclable, and it all goes in one container. Put that container out at the curb, relatively simple. We also have here at this facility, there's a little building nearby called the Eco Drop. Okay, this is where you can take things that should not be going to the landfill. Things like e-waste that we mentioned previously, anything that's hazardous, solvents, paints, chemicals. You could bring appliances, recyclable rechargeable batteries. All those things can go to this facility, this Eco Drop, and that's to divert this sort of waste that could be dangerous to be processed specifically so that it's not contaminating the environment. We could also see here there's a compost area at this facility, which we'll mention in another slide. That's there as well. So locally, what happens to the stuff that gets sent to the recycling facility, the stuff that you put out at the curb in a recycling bin? So at the recycling facility that we just saw, it gets sorted. All of the different recyclable materials need to be separated. So glass needs to be separated from metal. Different types of metal get separated from each other. The paper gets separated out. The plastics need to be separated by their plastic type. So most of this is mechanical, and some of it is manual. Watch a video in class where you'll see the process. But there's a whole host of different mechanisms which allow for that material to be sorted into the proper categories so that it can be recycled efficiently. And so we see this is from the annual report from the Onondaga-Herkimer Solid Waste Authority. This is in 2023, what happened to the recycling. So you can see how much mixed paper and plastics were recycled. You could see the papers here. You could see the plastics. You could see the glass, and you can see the metals. So different amounts of those materials were marketed. And what that means is our facility takes the single stream recycling, attempts to sort it properly, and then they basically compact it and bale it, put it into huge quantities, and then it gets sold off to other facilities. There's a whole bunch of places that will buy from our recycling facility, PET plastic or mixed aluminum recyclables or glass aggregate, and they will then use that to sell or to manufacture new products. So this material that gets separated and bundled gets sold, and then what happens after that is sort of up to those companies. So in 2023, our facility sold their recyclable goods to these various facilities for about $1.8 million or so. So that's raising revenue. It's also diverting that material from landfills. It's also saving on fossil fuel and resource use to produce new materials. There are also, prior to 2018, what's important, or I should say it's still important, not prior to 2018, but what is really important is that this material gets sorted correctly. When we have contaminated recyclables, where you have a mixture of paper and plastics, for example, that's not very helpful. And most places are not going to buy sort of contaminated recyclables because it's more difficult or impossible to actually turn them into usable products because they're a mixture of different materials. And so the quality of the sorting of materials is really important. And so when we think about what we have, a single stream recycling, that is helpful to consumers, to households, right? Because it's simple. But it presents challenges to the recycling facility because then the responsibility is on the recycling facility to actually properly separate it so that it can be marketed and sold and actually recycled. Because if material that goes to the recycling facility can't be sold, it can get landfilled. It just goes to the landfill. And so that's important. So there's a trade-off between single stream recycling and a sorting system of recycling. And so in prior years, China was buying large quantities of recyclable material. Often they would purchase even contaminated recyclables. And so there was a market where recycling facilities could sell this material at a lower cost to China. But in 2018, China developed this policy called the National Sword Policy, which banned the import of solid waste and also limited the import of contaminated recyclables. And what that did is that really depressed the market for mixed recyclables or contaminated recyclables. And it led at the time of lots of facilities being unable to sell, especially the plastics that they had recycled and baled, they had a very difficult time selling them. And so oftentimes they just got landfilled. And so the quality of that material that gets sorted is really important. Also, green waste, another example. Our recycling facility handled over 10,000 tons of green waste last year. That's stuff like leaves, brush, stumps, pallets, even hops from the brewery go here. And basically they have these huge windrows, these are compost piles. So they'll grind up this green waste, this organic material, they form it into these rows, and it starts to break down. They turn it over so that it decomposes quickly, and eventually it decomposes into compost, and they can then sell that compost. Sell it in bulk, they sell it in bags, you could go down there and buy it. And again, that prevents this material from going to the landfill, where it could go through anaerobic decomposition and release methane. One other interesting technological advancement in the last several years is this food to energy facility. So next to the recycling transfer station is the wastewater treatment plant. And there they built this large anaerobic digester. You can see it. There's several of these. They look like a globe. And these are a way of taking organic material and extracting from it methane to be used for generating electricity. The way it works, it's over, you can see over here, this is just a model, but you take organic material. It can come from lots of sources. It can be from grocery stores. Their waste vegetables that are going to be thrown away can be diverted here. Restaurants, food processors, some colleges from their dining halls, the organic waste can go and be brought to this facility. And basically you put this in the anaerobic digester, which has special bacteria which break it down without oxygen, and that produces methane. Now, if that methane were just to be released in the atmosphere, that would be bad. That would be leading to increased levels of climate change. But in these anaerobic digester facilities, they actually capture that methane. It's also called biogas. And then they can use that basically as a substitute for natural gas. And they could run turbines to generate electricity. They can heat buildings and so forth. And so this anaerobic digester facility provides about 50% of the energy needs at the water treatment plant. So it's significantly making an impact there. And how do they incentivize people, colleges or restaurants or grocery stores to utilize this? They reduce the cost of disposing of material. So, for example, if you're in Oneida County and you have a college and in your dining hall you're generating large amounts of food waste, if you're just getting rid of it with the garbage, it would cost $60 per ton. It's called the tipping fee to dispose of it. But if instead you take it and bring it to the food to energy program and dispose of it in this anaerobic digester, it's about a third as much. It's $40 per ton to get rid of it. And so that incentivizes facilities to utilize this. And so this is, another way of diverting material from going to a landfill.